Okay, so today we're back to talk about a few manga I read. This time the theme is going to be all volume ones. So I have 4 different books that we want to talk about today. The Last Elf, Ruri Dragon, Thunder 3, and The Color of the End. Now, all of these books have varying different themes, so I thought this would be like a good selection of things to kind of talk about since they all kind of have different kind of things going on in them, but they all have their own merits. So what we're going to do is talk about them, give you a little bit of a synopsis, and rate them. So I don't want to ramble on too much, but before we talk about these books, hey, if you're liking any of my content, go ahead and click that like and subscribe button, turn on those post notifications, and let me know that you fucks with your boy the long way, you feel me? And I'm gonna keep doing what I do best, delivering this fire content that you love. So without further ado, let's talk about the books. So The Last Elf is a fantasy story about literally the last of an elfin race and the survivor of a 100-year war that humanity raged on all things magic. Now, this includes magical beasts and spirits, and the way the magic system works in this world is a little bit interesting in my opinion. Now, the story follows Ahura, I don't know, I'm bad with names, but she is the titular last elf who is on a self-imposed mission to free these mystical spirits and beings from the world as it becomes more and more reliant on technology and advancements instead of magic. Now, it is very obvious that Ahura is a talented mage who spent many years, maybe even decades, honing her craft. Now, she practices a form of magic that has long been forgotten and might be the only person on the planet who can actually do it, though that remains to be seen. What does it do well? Well, first of all, I think it's characters. We aren't really introduced to very many characters. A majority of the time you do spend with Ahura herself. However, it does do a solid job of introducing whatever side characters that they do bring up and giving you some reason to really care about them and what they have going on. Now, that's not to say that it is entirely successful at this, but for the most part, it works. Now, the most fascinating thing about Last Elf to me is the premise itself. Though I did have some issues with the actual execution itself, and we'll talk about that more a little bit later on, I did find the core premise of the story to be intriguing enough to keep going. The idea of a world actively moving on from magic while having its own kind of industrial revolution is fascinating, especially because they do acknowledge the fact that magic does exist in some way, shape, form, or fashion. Usually in these type of stories, they just kind of try to pretend like magic just does not exist. They're just making an active effort to show, I guess, the kind of, how do you put it? The power of technology, or why technology is better than magic, so to speak. I also think that Ahura herself being the last elf is an interesting premise in and of itself as well. It really gives you the reason why she's the last elf too in the first couple of pages of the book. So they kind of give you all the game like right off the bat. Also, I think it's kind of cool that her motivations in the book isn't really revenge at all. It really is to bring peace to these wandering contract spirits, which I think is kind of a nice touch. It's nice to see your main character just not obsessed with trying to get revenge on the people who did what they did to her, and just, you know, trying to do something good for like the remaining spirits and send them off into peace. Now, with that said, there are a few things that I think the book does not do well. First of all, I think there's not much world building, which is kind of odd because I feel like world building is like a very key thing for this particular book, or should be a key thing. The most interesting thing about it is kind of what they're trying to do, build a world of technology from a world of magic. I don't know why they're not showing us more of that. Now, maybe they'll build on this over time, but the most that you get from this book technologically, or I guess industrial, or however you want to put it, is quite a few shots of like this train running through the city and countryside or whatever. And I think that is like a little bit disappointing because I think that they should show more of this technology. I think that's something that would have been critical for this first volume, just to bring home the impact of this particular change. I think they do a lot of talking about it, but they don't show it to you. So hopefully we'll get a little bit more of that in subsequent volumes. With that said, what is my final verdict on this book? Well, I think it's a 6 out of 10. It's not a great start. It's not bad. It's a middle of the pack book. So, I'm not to say that it is bad, but I think that there's still not enough world building. Like I said, I think that we could get a little bit more out of the characters that we're seeing, a few more of their motivations. I definitely think the back half of the book is a little bit better, which I do say a lot in these. I think the lead up to it was not great, but I definitely think you get a little bit more characterization. But I would like to see a little bit more about Ahura's backstory beyond the first couple of pages that they give us. I would also like to see a lot more from this world because I think that is probably the most interesting thing out of this book. With that said, I believe that I am going to keep reading this one. I think there's a lot to improve on. I think it has a solid enough foundation. A 6 out of 10 is not like terrible. So I think it has a really solid foundation, and I think it has some really great ideas to build on. So would I recommend this? No, not right now. I think maybe give it a few more volumes to build up and see where it goes before I can really tell you, all right, this is a good enough story for you to latch onto. I just think there's not enough there right now for me to recommend it. However, I will continue reading it because I'm just interested enough to see if they build on these kind of ideas and concepts. Okay, so the next series we're going to cover is Ruri Dragon, which basically boils down to this high school girl wakes up one morning with dragon horns. Now, it sounds like a very simple premise, and in a lot of ways it is, but it's got a few complexities under it. It's definitely dealing with coming of age, growing into your own, with a few shonen elements being teased at least early in this first volume. I think the charm of this series really comes from its characters, from Ruri herself to her mom to her classmates and all the other people around her, and how they kind of play this whole her having dragon horns and in turn some powers later on, and how they kind of all react to it. Now, with that said, that is one of the things that I think Ruri Dragon does very well. Its characters. They're all very, very endearing just from jump. They're just the sweetest kids. Like, you would think kids would be really mean, but they're not. And there's a reason for this, and it's the star of the show, and that's Ruri's mom. Ruri's mom laid a lot of groundwork early for this to happen, as well as after it happened, just going and talking to like the school, the administrators, and even the kids after she had her horns in an accident that she had, and just smoothed things over and kind of prepared these kids for this oddity that they're going to have to deal with. In turn, it lets the comedy bits breathe really nicely. It also has like a little bit of emotional weight because Ruri herself is a little bit of I don't know if I would describe her as a loner, but definitely like an awkward kid, and her having these dragon horns really kind of, I don't know, like got her out of her shell, so to speak, which is, in my opinion, a really great way to write this particular situation, because it could have forced her into a corner and it could have written it that way. But instead, it was written as a way to kind of break her out of her normalcy and to have her interacting with more kids. Now, another thing the story is doing very well right now is it's positioning itself as a slice of life kind of series, but you can tell it has some typical shonen elements in there too. Like, for example, they show one of the powers that Ruri has. I don't want to spoil that for you. You should read it in the book. And also they kind of tease something else she may have going on later on in the book. So it seems like not only are they building kind of a world around Ruri in some ways, but also they're teasing like there has to be something bigger for her to do with these dragon powers that she has. With that said, there are quite a few things that this story fumbles the bag on, in my personal opinion. Now, the first thing that I kind of didn't really enjoy from the series was the art. It's not necessarily bad, it's just not great. I will say Ruri's character design is absolutely adorable, but everything around her just doesn't look very good, especially her mom. And it's kind of odd to me because her mom is such an important character. Now, it's not that she's drawn ugly per se. She just has like this really sketchy quality to her. And that's a lot of the characters in this book. They're drawn very like sketchy style. And you'll find yourself hard pressed to like really remember any faces and in turn any names. Now, I think this is an intentional art choice. Maybe it's just me that doesn't really care too much for the art in it. It's not going to stop me from reading it because more than the art, I read these for the stories themselves. Also, not much happens in the first volume, to be completely honest with you. There's a lot of setup for Ruri's story, but there's not a ton of like world building, so you don't really know what's going on around them. Like, are there other mixed being kids or half human, half, I don't know, monster or whatever you want to call it, kids out there? Is there any battles going on out there? Because it just seems odd for her to have these powers and not really do anything with them. I mean, I guess they could play it like that. I'm not saying that that is not impossible or something that they can't pull off, but it would seem odd for her to have these powers and not really be able to use them for anything but parlor tricks. That's all I'm saying. Though it does also seem logical, since she is half dragon, for her to have powers that dragons typically have. So I don't know what they're going to do with that other than get her into some type of like battle situations. And that brings me to the point that this series is kind of polarizing. Now, it's pretty simplistic in what it tries to accomplish. I don't think on its face it is offensive. I just think that this series had a lot of hype behind it, and it didn't really deliver on that hype for a lot of people. Because like I said, in the first volume, which is what, 4 or 5 chapters, 6 chapters, I don't remember how many it is, but it doesn't really do much. Like literally not much happens, which if you're used to a more slice of life type of manga, you're used to things not really happening much. It's mostly about the characters, but there's also not a ton of development for the characters. Like Ruri doesn't really go anywhere, and she doesn't have a ton of characterization. I think there's a bigger build coming later on. You know, once again, the first volume is designed to get you really invested in what it is that you're going to be reading, and I don't think this book does a great job of that. But I think the ideas are good enough that most people will stick around just to see where it goes. I think a lot of the backlash also was not helped by the fact that the mangaka went on hiatus shortly after, you know, the first volume or the first few chapters of this book was like kind of put out. So the people who really enjoyed it were a little annoyed because they, you know, didn't have anything else to read. And the people who didn't really enjoy it, or her maybe waiting for the other shoe to drop, had to wait even longer for the other shoe to drop. So difficult situation to be in. So what's my final verdict on this? Well, I put this at a 7 out of 10. I really enjoyed the characters and the storytelling just enough to make me want to come back for more. It makes me want to stick around. I'm going to read a few more volumes of it. I think there's just enough groundwork in this book to really showcase the potential in it. And I think the storytelling is overall solid. I mean, once again, it's really structured like slice of life storytelling. If you're used to that, if you enjoy that, then I think you will enjoy at least the first volume of this book, especially with the promise of something more to come. Now, I, once again, don't know if I could recommend this book for you just starting off with nothing else behind it. I think this is one that you're going to probably have to wait until they put a few more volumes out before you really get invested in it and see exactly where it's going, because it's not entirely evident in the first volume. Okay, for our next story, we're going to talk about The Color of the End, which is a post-apocalyptic situation where pretty much most of humanity is gone. They've been wiped out by these mysterious invaders called the Executioners, I believe they're called. And basically what happens is there's a bunch of miasma in the air, something along those lines, and it causes people to like crystallize, or like, you know, parts of their body to crystallize. I don't know. That part is kind of convoluted. I don't really feel like that is really the point of this particular story. I mean, it kind of is, and it kind of isn't. It just is a setup for what's going on. Now, this particular story follows this unnamed protagonist, so I don't have to even sit here and just say main character just to be saying it, but the character has a name. This is actually an unnamed protagonist whose mission is to find any surviving humans, and also to kind of find out where these executioners came from, and if there's a cure for like the thing that they bring on to humanity or whatever. It's really crazy. So what are some things that I liked about this particular story? Well, it's a very quiet and contemplative story, and it also manages to feel like very terrifying at the same time. It's seeing a world that is very, very familiar to you, but also in complete ruin. These city streets that are completely devoid of any population, or, you know, at worst dead bodies, but just full of like buildings that are like falling over. It's really, really like a particular type of horror. Now, I'm not saying that this is meant to be a horror story. It's not really. It's more of a sci-fi. I don't know if it's like fantasy, but it is definitely a bit more of a sci-fi story in and of itself. And it does cover things like AI and technology and things of that nature. But it still really feels kind of scary. It kind of reminds me of living in Chicago during the pandemic and going out in the city and the streets being just totally empty because everybody was inside. And And so that was kind of terrifying. Like being on the train and it's just me in a car and maybe like some random homeless person walking back and forth was like genuinely kind of terrifying, honestly. The story itself does not feel very hopeful at all. Like you don't really feel like she's gonna find anybody. Spoiler alert, she does actually find somebody at some point in time in the story, but even that does not end in a very hopeful way at all. That said, the other thing that I think it does incredibly well is the artwork. The artwork is absolutely gorgeous. Like there are some really, really detailed backgrounds, and you can tell a lot of the focus is not necessarily on character design itself, but how the world looks. The executioners, which you don't really find alive in this book, you mostly find them dead, but they are truly like almost Lovecraftian in their design. They are very, very scary looking. I could not imagine like encountering something like that. I also feel like the cityscapes are really, really detailed and really, really gorgeous looking, even if they are in complete ruin. There's a ton of mystery just in the art itself. Without them even saying anything, and even without the groundwork that's being laid, I think there is still like a ton of mystery just looking around at this artwork and seeing kind of what's happened in this world so far. Now, with that said, there's not much that doesn't work in this book. In fact, I feel like it's pretty well executed. If I were to complain about anything, I feel like the story itself lacks a little bit of interconnectivity. Other than us seeing it from the main character's kind of point of view, all of these things that she's encountering, I should say, are being told to her from someone else, but we're seeing it from her perspective, so to speak. We're not necessarily seeing it from these characters' perspectives. This book feels more like a collection of short stories than anything else, which is not necessarily a bad thing. I think that is a choice in storytelling. In fact, I feel like that's kind of a common thing, especially in volume 1 or the first few chapters of most manga, when they're just really kind of trying to figure out what they're doing. It do feel like a collection of short stories. These just feel especially disjointed, in my opinion. There is, however, a lot of world building ensconced in all of this kind of short form storytelling. You do get to kind of stay in some of the same areas over and over again just to see kind of like what's happening there. So I think that is a thing that is kind of bringing things together. And once again, I do feel like the mangaka is telling a longer form story, and I think we'll get a little bit more interconnectivity later on in the series. With that said, and this could be a plus or a negative, reading volume 1, I did not necessarily feel like I needed more story. I just wanted more story. Like I just wanted to see like what else is going on out here. But I didn't feel like the main character's mission really needed to be accomplished. I feel like just having a glimpse into this world and what's going on and these like handful of stories that are being told gave me pretty much everything that I needed. So what is my final verdict? Well, I give this one an 8.5 out of 10. Pretty high scoring one on this list so far. This is a really great first volume, and like I said, I feel like wanting more is a little bit of a luxury for this, so it bookends itself very well. I don't feel like very many mangakas accomplish that in a first volume, so it works out well if the story ends up getting canceled. It's got a really great concept to build on and a very likable lead to kind of carry the story, so I think, you know, this thing's got some legs. It's got some mystery to it. It's got some horror elements, some sci-fi. I mean, I think it's got a lot of different things going for it that will make you want to continue reading it, or at least make you enjoy that first volume in and of itself. So I would definitely recommend picking this one up. I think this is a great one and done read if you never read anything else from the story, or maybe a great series to kind of keep up with and see where they go with some of the things they laid out. Okay, and for our final story, we're going to be talking about Thunder 3, which comes from the same mangaka, maybe the same team that did both Gigant and Gantz. So if you're familiar with those two works, you know you're in for an absolute ride with this particular one, and it does not disappoint. Now, Thunder 3 is one that is very difficult to explain the premise of it without giving away very critical spoilers. So let me try to sell you on this series with as little essential information as I possibly can give you. It follows, and I say that very loosely, 3 middle school boys, one of which who loses his sister, who is sucked into a parallel universe from a video game that they borrowed from one of their teachers or something like that. Now, what happens after this is absolutely bonkers. The little 3, as they are dubbed by one of the high school girls that one of them clearly has a crush on, are tasked with saving the little sister and quite possibly this entire world. Look, that's all I can give you without giving away too much of this manga, and trust me, you are gonna want to read this one. So, what does Thunder 3 do well? Well, first of all, it subverts your expectations. It starts off with this very familiar retro style, think maybe like early Astro Boy style artwork. Yeah, kind of like like that. It's almost annoying to look at. I actually found myself wondering what was the point for the first few pages of this until we really got into the meat of it. But once that twist takes hold of it, you're kind of taking down this entire rabbit hole. It finds a way to take something that feels very familiar and maybe even innocuous and turn it into something downright creepy. And then once you get past that first intro, that's when the story really starts to pop off. You can really tell the mangaka learned a lot from the work that they did on Gigant specifically, because they do take a lot of that photorealistic stuff that they were doing in Gigant and just refine it in this book to the point where the backgrounds and even the character designs look absolutely incredible when you get to this next dimension or this next world or parallel universe or whatever it is. And once you get past that intro, the world really opens up and creates like a whole nother kind of mystery or intrigue that's going on that you really want to figure out, okay, what the fuck is going on here? Now, with that said, we got to talk about the things that it didn't do quite as well. Now, it's not terrible. Volume 1 is about as tidy as you can get for a first volume, especially one that leaves a lot of plot threads hanging for you to kind of grapple onto. And I have actually read ahead and read Volume 2 as well, so I know that it does execute things very well and give you more to latch onto. But this book is really going to come down to whether those plot threads and what it's trying to say is captivating to you personally, because this is definitely not going to be for everybody. It's going to be pretty niche in and of itself. I'm going to be completely honest with you. It's not very broad at all. With that said, I think that plays a lot into what I was saying about the first few pages or the first chapter of Volume 1. You're going to have to kind of meander through a lot of stuff before you get to the meat of it. And you have to decide whether or not there is enough there for you to kind of want to figure out how this thing opens up. Because I can imagine just reading chapter 1 of this, like the first few pages of it, and being like, what the fuck is this? And why do I even want to read this? You have to really have a lot of trust in the mangaka's previous work to get past that first chapter, to be quite honest. I would also say that so far, the characters are not the most interesting part about this story. Like, the things that they're doing are interesting. I think the rules of this world are kind of interesting. I think the setup, the premise is very interesting, and I think the artwork is gorgeous. But I think the characters that we're dealing with just right now seem a little bit bland. Like, they just are lacking a little bit of seasoning, a little bit of flavor, like something to make you want to care about them individually. They just seem like a reason to get us here in this particular world and get involved in the conflict that's going on in this world or in this particular reality that they're in. And I think that comes from a lot of the focus being placed squarely on the world building itself and not so much the characters. And yes, in Volume 2, you get a little bit more characterization, but it's like more so from like other characters that they introduce, not really our main three. So I do want to see a little bit more development coming from our main three. So what's my final verdict? Well, this one was an 8 out of 10. I definitely think there are some things that it could do a little bit better. I would like to see a little bit more coming out of the main characters. I mean, they are literally on the cover of the books, so I want to see a little bit more coming out from them, other than they're here and they're kind of like the engine that's, I don't want to say they're the engine driving the plot, because they're like, not really. It's really more so the world is the engine driving the plot, but they're more the conduit to which we're introduced as to what's going on in this world. But other than that, I mean, I think the backgrounds are absolutely gorgeous. I think the concept is very interesting. I think what they're kind of trying to set up and what they're trying to build is really great. And I think the world building is excellent. I think this one is really worth a read. Now, like I said before, this particular story is not going to appeal to everybody, but the good thing is there are 3 full volumes out. So this is a good time for you to kind of jump on the story and decide whether or not this is going to work for you. But I will say, if you do like high concept work that is not too hard to follow, this would be a great book for you to grab. All right, and there you have it, my friends, the 4 volumes that I read: Ruri Dragon, Thunder 3, The Color of the End, as well as The Last Elf. So let me know down in the comments if you have read any of these, or if you were thinking about reading any of these, this helped you kind of decide to pick them up. I had a pretty good time reading all these books, even if they weren't all like great. I don't think everything has to be great. I talk about the power of the mid mid anyway all of the time. And though a few of these books were kind of mid, I still think I'm going to continue reading them. Anyway, if you enjoyed this video or any of my other content, please go ahead, click that like, subscribe button, go ahead, turn on post notifications. Let me know that you fox with your boy the long way, you feel me? And I'm gonna keep doing what I do best, delivering you that fire content I know you love, baby. So coming down the line, of course, we're gonna have part 2 to those figures that I unboxed off camera. This time the scale figures, working on that one right now. We're gonna be doing a manga hunting video at some point in time, anime video, like all the good stuff. We're just gonna keep pumping it out, man. I'm doing it a little bit slower right now because I want to take my time and make sure I'm doing it like how I want it, make sure things execute the way that I want to execute them. I'm just trying to make sure I bring better quality to the channel. You know what I'm saying? Quality over quantity. You feel me? So you may see the videos releasing a little bit inconsistently right now, and that's fine. Also, I was thinking about maybe like streaming some games. I've been wanting to play Persona 5 for a long time, and I think maybe streaming it for you guys either here on YouTube or on Twitch might be like a fun thing for us to do and a way for you to get to know me a little bit better. I haven't quite hit the point where I feel like I want to do like a Discord server, just because I have a hard time like keeping up, like, you know, staying active in the Discord server and like talking about stuff. But I wouldn't mind talking to you guys on stream and spending a few hours a week just hanging out, playing some games, just chatting. We don't even have to play games. We can talk about manga. We can do whatever. You know, we can talk about fashion. Fashion's kind of my other passion. So I just bought some really cool Rick Owens pants. I'm just saying. So we can talk about those or anything else. But yeah, broad swath of topics. There's a lot of different things we could do. But let me know down in the comments if you would be interested in catching some streams. I think that could be something fun to do and something that I used to do and I kind of like doing. I like streaming. It's fun. But my primary focus is to pump out content for you guys. And also, if you want to see me do more short form content or more like Instagram based content, I do have a Instagram for like the Sad Marcus thing, but I just don't really put anything on it. And I would love to get some ideas from you guys, like what you want to see. Obviously, I just want to help you guys get to know me a little bit better and get to know you guys a little bit better, so that we can connect a little bit more and that I can like find that good balance of, you know, delivering stuff that you guys want to see while also doing stuff that I feel that's like very authentic to me. Anyway, like I always say, let's continue to talk about the things that we like, the things that we don't, and everything in between. And until next time, peace.